Hey, hi, hello there. I wanted to welcome you into the show, this Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you for clicking on the link, however you're listening to this. I am your host, Don Kleppen. And if it's your first time here, this is a show that I created a little under 2 years ago to start chronicling and examining closely the end of the prohibition of cannabis in the United States and hopefully around the world. We are moving slowly toward every day a United States where cannabis is at least removed from the Schedule I substances list under the Controlled Substances Act, possibly fully decriminalized or even legalized. That definitely seems to be the path that we're on, and there are news stories and there are changes in that landscape every single day, and I like to bring to you the news, events, perspectives, as well as expert interviews, all here on the Cannabis Man podcast. You can follow the show on social media at C-Man Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. It's the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page and YouTube channel. However you're listening to this, do me a favor and hit that like button, leave a nice rating or a review if you haven't already, and become a subscriber to the show. Scroll down into those description notes and click on that support the show link. It'll take you to a Buzzsprout page and you can sign up to be a subscriber. You'll get an email thanking you from me and you'll get a shout out in the next episode. I've got a very interesting interview for you coming up later in this episode. I'm speaking with a writer who's been in the cannabis space for well over a decade now, and he writes for a publication that I've talked about on the show before, Cannabis.net. And this writer goes under the pseudonym Reginald Reefer. And Reginald put out a piece a few weeks ago about a story that I talked about on this podcast. It was a story that seemingly was out of the same classic reefer madness propaganda handbook that we're familiar with from the last century. It made the rounds, and if you didn't hear that episode where I spoke about it, it was where a woman reportedly took a hit off a bong and then stabbed her boyfriend over 100 times and stabbed the dog and stabbed herself. Very sensational stuff. And Reginald posed in his article for Cannabis.net that maybe this was a PSYOP, a psychological operation that intelligence agencies like the CIA or others around the world have engaged in the past in an effort to control a narrative or public perception about any given topic. And so Reginald and I talk about cannabis at large, the history of it, propaganda, as well as who might be interested in making such a PSYOP or putting out a story like this, especially as we seem to be moving closer and closer toward legal cannabis in the United States. I've also got news stories, some exciting topics. It's been a heck of a week since we last spoke. I've got a lot of topics to bring to you, as well as some exciting news and events coming up related to cannabis, and of course I'll get to those and more. So without further ado, let's get into this episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Hit it!
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis broadcast.
Yes. Delicious and delectable. And welcome in. Thank you for joining the Cannabis Man podcast. Now that the show open is over and we're into the show proper, I've decided to light up my strain of the week here. I've got my cup of coffee next to me. I've got a nice cup of Split Rock coffee with me this morning. Very delicious. I'm a big fan of their Colombian roast. They've got all kinds of delicious coffee products at Split Rock. If you're interested in getting some of it shipped to your door, scroll on down to the description notes and click on the Vouch Store link. It'll take you to the Cannabis Man podcast show page, and you can order different products from Split Rock Coffee. Get them shipped right to your door. It's veteran-owned. It's a great business worth supporting, and they make some delicious coffee products. And as I've talked about on the show, I love pairing cannabis and coffee whenever I can. There is a wonderful kind of dance that those two substances do in my system. Everybody's different. I say on the show all the time, Substances are subjective, just like our opinions are about anything else. Your tastes in food and drinks are subjective. They're individual. They're your own. Your taste in substances is going to be the same. But for me, cannabis and coffee is a delectable combination, and I love to indulge in it whenever I can to kind of start my day. And I'm doing so right now. Lovely. I hope you're able to blaze with me whenever you might be listening to this, wherever you are. If it's a weekday, if it's a weekend, light up a joint, crack a nice drink, pop a gummy, fire up the dab rig, whatever you like doing. Cheers to you. I hope you're able to enjoy this alongside of me. If you're not, just look forward to the next time you can. Hopefully it's not too far from now. Now, my strain of the week this week is a fun hybrid. I was talking about this recently. It just hit the market, and it's a debuted concept from Green Thumb Industries' Rhythm brand of flower. They've partnered with various musicians. This strain comes from a partnership with State Champs, who have a new album out and a song which shares a title with this strain of flower. It's called Out of My Head, which is a song from State Champs, and it's a new rhythm strain of flower. This hybrid is rich in trichomes, which, as you know, are the resin glands containing cannabinoids and terpenes. I find this hybrid leaning a little bit more towards sativa. It's chill, it's not high energy, but you do feel a little bit of that creative euphoria, and it does put you in a very nice mood to kind of socialize and just play around. Definitely not a couch-gripping indica, definitely not like a morning starter sativa like I like to pair with my coffees, but it is a nice hybrid that rides in the middle, and it's more of a head feel than a body high. But the trichomes are rich. This is a sticky flower. You can really kind of feel it when you break it apart in your fingers. This batch was harvested in December and was packaged in late January, and I got it from The Rise in Niles. So, very fun. I'm enjoying my strain of the week, and go out and get yourself some of this Out of My Head from your local Rise whenever you can. Now let's roll right into the News Joint Wrap. This is a wrap-up of news stories and events relating to cannabis in and around Illinois, and it's all curated for you by IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Think of it as the joint you can hit for all your Illinois cannabis news and reviews. And let's start with kind of a big one, I thought. CIJA, C-I-J-A, announced a grant opportunity for R3 programs worth $30 million. This is the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. They put out a notice of funding opportunity to provide restore, reinvest, and renew programming in historically underserved Illinois communities. You've heard me speak about R3 programs on the show before with Representative LaShawn K. Ford. He is very big in the R3 space. I spoke with Representative Ford about a year ago. This was last March we were speaking about this. So if you didn't hear that episode, you can hear us talking about programs just like this one. Well, now Illinois News Joint put out an article saying that CIJA has $30 million available in grants for various R3 opportunities. The grants will support service delivery in communities most impacted by poverty, violence, and other consequences of systemic racism. Application materials with instructions on how to apply are available at IllinoisNewsJoint.com, and they must be submitted by April 30th of this year. The notice says funded programs will offer evidence-based, promising, or innovative practices within at least one of the 5 R3 program priority areas. These are civil legal aid, economic development, re-entry from the criminal justice system, violence prevention, and youth development. Those are the 5 areas that R3 is prioritizing. So if you have an idea that could benefit one of these communities in one of R3's priority areas, you can submit that idea and potentially get some funding from this program but you've got to submit that by April 30th of this year. More information can be found on that opportunity at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Another opportunity that I wanted to tell you about, you can find on the website. Craft growers can now submit for canopy expansion. Illinois Department of Agriculture and the Division of Cannabis Regulation announced earlier this week that effective immediately, Illinois licensed craft growers may submit an application to the IDOA for a canopy modification expansion in 3,000, 6,000, and 9,000 square foot increments up to a max of 14,000 square feet. So if you have a craft grow license in Illinois and you have a canopy under which you're growing your product that is 14,000 square feet or less, you can submit a request for modification right now to Illinois Department of Agriculture. Craft growers seeking canopy expansion should submit a canopy modification application along with a CRTA application for modification or alteration request form. You can find all the information along with a link to the forms page that you need to get to, as well as the address to send these forms to. All of that is available for you at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. And a couple of reviews I wanted to highlight that they have here recently. Lavender Lucy Hash Infused Joint by Legacy, Grape Ape Brick by Select, Tropicana Punch BX1 by Heisman, and Raspberry Punch High Dose Gummies by The Botanist. You can check out reviews of all of those products, as well as more information about the topics I brought up, as well as many more, and any events that you might be interested in coming up in or around Illinois related to cannabis. All of that is available for you anytime at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. In addition to the cup of coffee that I had this morning, I'm recording this portion, listener, of this episode on the afternoon of March 7th. It's about 4 o'clock, approaching one of my favorite times of the day, 4:20. I usually like to celebrate a little bit of cannabis indulgence at that time if I have the availability to, and today I think I'll make that happen. But before I do that, I want to tell you about a new product that I'm sampling right now. This is a drink mix. It's from our friends at Maramed. I spoke with someone from them, and they make several products. They have a line of edibles, Betty's Eddies. They also have baked goods, Bubby's Baked, and they have drinks and other kind of consumable cannabis products. Well, they have a new line of product that's coming to the Illinois dispensaries here very soon, and you'll hear more about this as I interview someone from Maramed in a couple of weeks. But for right now, this product is called Vibations, like vibe and libations mixed together. And this is a powdered drink mix. It comes in a little packet, just like you would get Crystal Light, if you're familiar with that, or any drinkers of Liquid IV, the kind of hydration product that packs some electrolytes and sugars into this little powder that you mix into whatever drink you like. If it's water or Gatorade or whatever you're drinking, you can mix these powders into it and infuse them with whatever's in the powder. Well, these Vibations have energy as well as cannabis right in them. They've got THC and CBD, at least the one that I'm trying right now has those things. This is the Arnold Palmer flavor, sort of a mixture of lemonade and iced tea. That's the flavor of it, and it's got 5 milligrams each of THC and CBD. And I got to tell you, I'm loving this right now. I don't know if you can tell, but I do feel a little pick-me-up of energy. This was definitely what my afternoon needed. I've got some coworkers out there who just sampled some sheet cake from somebody's birthday. They ran out before I was able to get away from my traffic reports, and I'm not bitter because I had this Vibations right here, and this is my afternoon treat, and I'm really enjoying this right now. So cheers to you, and look out for Vibations at your Illinois dispensaries. This is an unpaid sponsorship that I'm offering. I have no affiliation with them, but I just want to tell you I'm loving this product, and I'm going to speak with somebody from Maramed about their Vibations products coming up soon. Listener, my guest today has a story to tell, and I'm very excited to get into it with him. He's been a journalist covering the cannabis space for quite some time now, and you may remember a few weeks back, I brought up a news story that was making the rounds talking about how a woman had stabbed her boyfriend over 100 times and was blaming cannabis, some bong that she hit, and then all the news stories that talked about it then went on, banging the drum like the old days of Reefer Madness, talking about cannabis-induced psychosis and kind of blaming weed specifically for this woman's horrific and violent act of stabbing her boyfriend and herself. And so there's a blog post about this, and I've read some articles to you before on the show from Cannabis.net. I like the publication. I've definitely found some interesting info here, and my guest today is an author of a blog talking more deeply about this story and questioning if that story is part of a new PsyOps program, sort of hearkening back to the days of Reefer Madness and extending the propaganda, the same kind of stuff that I've talked with you about on the show. Listener, please welcome Jandre Gerber, a.k.a. Reginald Reefer, to the Cannabis Man podcast. Welcome.
Hey, Don. Thanks for having me here. Glad to be here, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for the great writing that you do for Cannabis.net. Before we get to the piece, let's talk a little about you, Jandre, if you don't mind. How long have you been covering cannabis?
Originally, I think I started writing about in 2009. That was the first thing. And I worked for several different publications. I worked for Marijuana Doctors for about 3 years. And then I worked stints did content for High Times, did content for maybe about 10 different brands as well. And eventually I settled here with Cannabis.net, and I've been just writing for them for the past 4 or 5 years now.
Right on. Very, very cool. And obviously you have, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of experience in the space and just kind of paying attention to what's been going on with cannabis as it's slowly been legalized state by state, medically and recreationally over the last, 15 years now from that point. And just tell us a little about your journey in general. What was it that made you kind of want to start covering cannabis for the different publications you've worked for?
Originally, I was a traveling musician. So what I was doing, I was just basically traveling, gigging. And eventually, a love story. I met my significant other. We were apart. She was living. By the way, I live in Mexico. Yeah. I've been living in Mexico. I'm originally from South Africa, but I've been living in Mexico since 1997.
Wow, Mr. International, Mr. Gerber. Yeah. I had no idea. That's awesome.
People hear my accent. They're like, "Yeah, he's American." I've always been in my heart an American, but I'm a South African in Mexico. I was traveling, and I was in California for a while. I played. Just traveling from the coast of Mexico, West Coast, all the way to California. And then from California, I kind of realized that I really dug my wife, that is today my wife.
Yeah.
But she was living in the opposite. She was on the East Coast in the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh.
So I went over there, but being a musician, you're not really loaded with money. And so
I've heard.
Yeah, and so I got there, and then our first year together was kind of rough economically, and she had some medical problems, and she went to Mexico City. And then I basically been traveling for 2 years, so I didn't have a job, I didn't have anything. I looked like a skinny version of white Jesus, like beard and long hair.
Sure, yeah. Iconic, though. It's an iconic look.
Yeah, very, very road warrior.
Sure.
Physique,
I like it.
So eventually I got to Mexico City, and I just, I was there by myself. I had nobody around me anymore. And I started just seeing what can I do. And I've always been a writer since 5 years old. So I found that somebody wanted to pay money for blogs. And so I was like, cool, I can do that. And then I started writing, and first it was just writing general stuff, but I've been, smoking weed myself since I was about 15.
Gotcha.
I've always liked it. I've always known about cannabis. I've never been, I never bought into the Reefer Madness, the programming, the DARE programs. I never, when I smoked, I realized this is all bullshit.
Yeah.
And so one day, I find this cannabis brand, Marijuana Doctors 411. They were trying to compete with Marijuana Doctors. And they were like, hey, do you want to write content? Do you know stuff about weed? And I was like, yeah, I do. And so I started writing. And then since then, I realized, I know a lot of cannabis stuff, and I just really dug deep into the culture, the politics, cultivation, the medicinal aspects. And right now I think I've got over 15,000 articles published.
Wow.
On the topic, yeah.
That's impressive. Very, very cool story. And it sounds like, your journey's taken you to different parts of the world, and you touched on something that I think is, I recognize it from my own journey, into using cannabis. I can remember being about 18 for me when I was first introduced to it, but I also, maybe after a month or 2 months kind of using it regularly with friends, I had the sort of breakthrough. I had the kind of watershed moment that you were talking about, which is to say that I realized all the messaging that I'd seen about cannabis early in my life, from the DARE, say no to drugs education, and the police officers coming to your 5th grade classroom and playing you some videos that seem right out of Reefer Madness now.
Yeah.
But the realization that all that messaging was false. I'm experiencing something right now that I can only describe as inherently good, that there's really, that it was really helpful to me in a lot of ways, and that the people in my life who had given me messaging opposite to that effect, antithetical to it, basically they were doing so out of malice or ignorance. And most of them, I decided it was out of ignorance because they just hadn't tried it for themselves.
Yes.
But either way, the message was the wrong one, which is to say that, cannabis is all bad, all addictive potential, all of the negativity wrapped up in that Reefer Madness propaganda, and none of the talk about the potential benefits, the health improvements, quality of life benefits that it could offer you, none of that stuff. And that's kind of what led me to, this podcast itself and kind of covering the space in my own way. So I can totally relate to your journey, man.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, because the same with me. When I started writing, that's when I really sort of solidified. I was always an anarchist at heart as well, since I think the first book I ever downloaded from the internet was the Anarchist Cookbook.
Nice, fitting.
Yeah, that was like, and I've always been interested in it. I've always been kind of opposite to the establishment. And weed has always been that symbol, it's been this core piece of anti-establishment, icon. It's just the icon. It's the representation of, screw the man. And when I started writing, then I had, permission to really dig deep into these narratives and say, okay, what is going on? All of these studies. And in fact, my mom, when I was about 22, she was like, listen, Jean-Andre, smoking weed's bad. And, she just regurgitated the exact same, narrative. And I was, listen, Mom, I told her, you got to prove to me that weed is bad. All right. I was like, if you can prove to me beyond the shadow of a doubt that cannabis is worse for me than alcohol, I'll stop. And then she did. And she went and studied. And then about 6 months later, she smoked weed with me for the first time. And I was like, all right, see, now you see. And now, today, she's a major advocate for cannabis. She's written stuff for, recipe books and stuff like that. So point being there, that the narratives, when you really dig deep into what they say and look into the studies, look into the policies, when you go deep down that rabbit hole, you understand that the whole thing's corrupt at its core, and that the narratives aren't, yes, most people are ignorant to it, but their ignorance is due to very well thought out malice.
Right. That's a great point. And the way you said that, I totally agree with, is that a lot of the ignorance is there because of the Reefer Madness, which was totally designed. That's by design to keep people from exploring a lot of this themselves. And it goes back to Harry Anslinger. But through the decades, Richard Nixon's White House is a great example of another period in history that was very much directed to kind of perpetuate those negative stereotypes and to keep people from exploring this themselves, kind of continuing to bang the drum of that this plant is inherently evil, and you're better off just completely staying away from it instead of, hey, explore for yourself and decide for yourself. And I think it's so cool that you kind of gave your mom that same directive, not necessarily, an ultimatum, but, not like a negative one, but just saying to her simply, look, if you can do a deep dive and if you can do the research here and actually bring to me an argument that definitively convinces me that cannabis is worse than alcohol, sure, I'll stop it. And then in that process, she completely changed her mind and now is an advocate for cannabis and is on the other side of that issue. And I know that there are, especially over the last decade, as states have legalized, I know that there are so many people in the space, and I've talked to many on the show, who have journeys just like your mom, which is to say they felt one way about cannabis, totally negative about it, and then doing some research or having some kind of experience, they flipped and did a 180 as well, and now they're on the other side of it. And that's part of where a lot of the momentum and the excitement in this legal cannabis space, I think, is coming from, is when people can have that experience in their own lives that makes them realize that they were on the wrong side of it, or that they didn't understand what it is. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah, man. I think it's, you got to ask yourself why, right? Like, why make cannabis illegal? This is the fundamental question behind prohibition, right? The claims are that cannabis is as bad as heroin, or at least that was the claim for the past 50 years, according to the Controlled Substance Act, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's like, you can't. And by the way, cannabis, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, they are all technically within the Schedule I category. And the big problem there being that now, today, we're finding out that LSD, psilocybin, all of these drugs that are deemed as dangerous as heroin, turns out to be incredibly beneficial for, depression, suicidal tendencies, facing your own mortality. So the question then becomes why? Why certain drugs are excluded while other drugs are allowed? And we can go into that. I don't think that's the purpose of today's talk, because we're going to talk about the PSYOP, which is tangent to this topic, right? If we want to go down, we have to travel back to 1971 with Nixon, my personal most hated president. But Nixon and the Controlled Substance Act and the way it's been drafted, in that sort of trifecta is where that answer lies to that question. Why cannabis? Why LSD? Why psilocybin? Why are these drugs excluded? And then why are these other drugs included? It really comes down to, in a nutshell, creating a monopoly of drug manufacturing and distribution by creating the pharmaceutical, and this is written into the 1971 version of the Controlled Substance Act, which basically says pharma is responsible for all drug distribution and development and research, and anybody else is an illegal criminal. And so that creates a centralized system of drug manufacturing, which then enabled the DEA to be their enforcers. And now basically any type of natural remedy or any type of other thing gets immediately, it's drugs, it's evil, don't touch it, it's going to destroy you. And that's basically, that's in a nutshell. But then we can also go into what happens with people's minds when they smoke weed over time. There's a lot of nuances within why certain drugs are excluded.
Yeah, totally. And I appreciate you kind of laying it out that way. And you're totally right. I would like to get into that. But let's start with, as I said, kind of the reason that I had reached out, because I wanted to have you on, is because this article that you wrote about this recent news story, in terms of that woman who stabbed her boyfriend 100 times and was let off very easily. It seems like no jail time, no anything, and she's now out there basically as an anti-cannabis spokesperson. So let's start with this article that you wrote about that case and kind of the argument that it is kind of a PSYOP program, a psychological operation, as you call it.
So Yeah, if people don't know the case, I think it's been discussed, lately a lot. So I think people are at least somewhat aware of it, which is, I believe, part of the psyop. Because, first of all, it's an absurd claim that one bong hit would do that.
Turns an otherwise rational person into a violent killer, right?
A violent maniac that would not just kill the boyfriend, but the dog, and then stab herself, which for me, that the whole narrative is very odd. It starts off with the fact that the police shows up at this house and they see this woman, she's stabbing herself, but somehow she called the cops too or something. I don't know what happened there. There's really murky information about how that went down.
Yeah, I noticed that myself.
Yeah, and then the cops show up and she's stabbing herself, and I'm making air quotes, but people can't see that. So she's stabbing herself. They take her for psychiatric evaluation. Oh, what's happening? What's happening? The weed made her do it. Eventually, her story evolves into that she took a bong hit. She believed she was dead, and the voices were telling her that in order for her to live, she had to kill the boyfriend, which, if we look at that in a vacuum, like completely absent from cannabis, that's schizophrenic behavior. That's not cannabis, right? That's like maybe she's a schizoid and she smoked weed and potentially she went into a psychotic episode, and that could explain it, but that means she's a violent schizophrenic. She should not be getting 100 hours of community service talking about how that one bong hit made her kill her boyfriend and the dog. That's what, for me, started becoming very odd. I was like, this is incredibly crazy. Then the second thing is, this is also very reminiscent of something that Anslinger said to make cannabis illegal in the beginning, like almost 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Which was a case, I think in the 50s or so, about another paranoid schizophrenic who killed his family with an axe in Miami or in Florida. Somewhere in Florida this happened.
Right.
And, they said he smoked one hit of a marijuana joint and killed his whole family with an axe. And that was the narrative for 30 years until some people went back and said, like, oh, this dude that killed his family was a known schizophrenic with violent tendencies for years. The cannabis made him do that. And so that got debunked. But this is kind of reminiscent of that same thing. It's just like quickly here, it appears in the social feeds. It appears everywhere. Marijuana made this woman kill her boyfriend. And that's that.
Right. And it gets that causality that you talk about. It's sort of like, how the lie circles the world 5 times before the truth has its breakfast, right? Where when somebody puts out a narrative, especially a sensational one like that, as you said, it's 30 years before people even go back and really look at it. And then, of course, by that time, it's far too late, the nugget of information that basically a Florida man took an axe to his family because of cannabis, that part of it's already circled the world and worked itself into people's minds. That's sort of, that narrative is out there now. And the retraction or the correction, if it's ever printed, most of the time it's not, but if it ever is, it hardly matters because that's a quiet message that goes under the rug quickly, but the initial lie that was so sensational, that's what's left over in people's heads.
Yeah, man, 100%. And the thing is, that's the whole purpose of a psyop. The purpose is not to have truth or anything, but it's to create an image, to create a container within the mind that influences your behavior. And so that is the whole point. And if people's like, well, psyops, that's conspiratorial and so forth. Sure, until you start investigating history and you realize, oh, this shit happens all the time. This isn't something that, and this is the big issue. Like, if you understand why cannabis is illegal or why drugs are being prohibited in the first place, you'll immediately realize that you don't have a benevolent government. Like, they are not sure. I'm not saying that the whole government as a whole is trying to, stifle and kill everybody. That's not true. The vast majority of the people, I would say 95 to 97% of the people working in government are doing it for noble reasons.
Right.
It's the same way as the narrative of prohibition. Most people that support it are doing it out of ignorance, but that ignorance is malevolent. That has been designed. And so the majority of the people working in government believe that they are actually fighting for your rights, and they're doing this. And very few of the people, and the people that are really pulling the strings, they're not in government. They are the funders, the donors, the super PACs. They're these people. And there's a revolving door between private corporations and government positions. And when you see this happening, you realize, okay, this is about control. This is about, maintaining a certain narrative so that the people stay in line. And that's part of the reason why they don't want you to explore with psychedelics or with weed. Is because if you do that enough, you'll start questioning the narrative.
That's kind of you touched on that a little bit when we were talking about the Nixon White House and even Anslinger too. And when you first mentioned like the reasons behind the prohibition like this, my instinct has always been that it came down to control. And I know that, as you just said, when you do dabble in psychedelics, like when you do try things like cannabis, like psilocybin, like LSD, those are mind-expanding substances. Psilocybin, you had kind of mentioned how good it is for things like trauma, or, what people have formed bad habits, or, sort of mental issues in the past when they formed that. Psilocybin is extremely helpful for kind of getting past that sort of thing. And when you look at the drugs that have been legalized and encouraged by the U.S. government over the last 100 years or so, you're looking at alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, right? And when I look at specifically tobacco and caffeine, those are stimulants, those are not mind altering, and it's basically all about that productivity. Go outside for 10 minutes, have your cigarette, get your little boost, and then get back to work for the 12 hours. And it's the same thing with a cup of coffee. They want that productivity to be maintained, to be helped along, ideally. What they don't want is for the worker to begin questioning why they're doing this in the first place, or maybe if there's better use of their time to improve their quality of life as they live. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man, you actually hit that nail straight on the head, because within this system, productivity is king, right? And you are not a citizen, you are the product. Like this is the thing. You have to understand that each of us has to understand this. It's that you are not the citizen that vote. Your vote really means nothing. And some people argue, well, if you don't vote and blah, 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 it's really just like making you feel that you're participating in a system. But
it's right. It's more symbolic. I take your point on that. Yeah. Like I'm a big proponent that people should vote, but I do get when you argue that there are super delegates, or that there are like super, votes that count more, like one for every 10,000 of us. And whichever direction your state leans, if you're not in the 8 swing states, yeah, it really, it's not going to sway the election too much. And so when people argue about that, I totally take your point there, where it's like voting is a good symbol and it makes you feel like you're part of the country. But in terms of like every vote counting toward the thing, that's not really accurate.
Yeah. And really, like, I do advocate for voting, but locally. I think locally is the only place where there's real power in voting, because that's where you can participate.
Yes, that's a great point. Good distinction to make.
But if you do it on a national scale, it's like you're basically, it's American Idol.
Yeah, totally.
And it's like, oh, my candidate of the, 330 million people in the United States, you got like these 5 corrupt bastards up top. That's, this is my freedom. It's right there. No, it's not. And this is where it comes down to. So the whole drug narrative is about that control. It's not questioning. It's about not interrupting the productivity, which then makes you your value be completely typecasted towards your productivity. And that's why drugs are another reason drugs are illegal, these type of drugs, because it is a sin against the system. right? You're stopping that productivity. You're like, wait a second, you're paying me what for all of my time?
Right.
And, and they're like, well, okay, now we can't have that happen. And then the drugs that are legal, caffeine and those things, those are productivity. But then there's also the pharma drugs, right? What do the pharma drugs do? That's for depression. They give you for anxiety. So these are effects and systems. These are drugs to treat the side effects of the system, not so much empower the individual to be its own system, to become its own thing. And that's the issue. So it's this tandem, this interplay between keeping the populace passive and not. I don't like to use the word awake, but not aware,
right,
of all of the bullshit that's happening around them. And when people, and then also, when they do become aware of that, bunch of distractions like the psyop, like. They bring these little morsels that they throw in front of us and like, oh yeah, but that's where it gets lost in the noise. And so they don't want us to get organized. They don't want us to think. And by they, I legitimately mean just a group of individuals or a group of organizations rather that are run by certain individuals, but it's not like I don't really think the Illuminati or
right.
I don't go that far. But I believe, it's like if like the FIFA organization, right? That's the type of stuff I'm talking about. BlackRock is a run by a board of certain people that owns 30% of all the commerce in the world. I don't know.
Right. But I get you. It's more that, like you said, you're not talking about Illuminati here where like there's a group in a shadowy room, meeting around a hologram of the emperor talking about, which direction the world's going to go in. But so it's not fictional like that, but it is a group of people who have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, right? Like people who want to keep things as they are because they are very directly and very, disproportionately benefiting from the status quo.
Yes, 100%. This is about power. This is about economics. This is not about sacrifice. It could be. Who knows? I don't know.
Right. One day, maybe they're working their way up to that point,
I
right?
don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Like the thing is, I don't like to infer beyond what I actually know, right?
Well, I think that's what that is that's a degree of journalistic integrity. There are plenty of people who work for publications or who have platforms like this one or whatever, and maybe it's easier to get some more clicks when you throw out sensational stuff.
Yeah.
The YouTube algorithm is going to love you if you start talking about the Illuminati. There's going to be a bunch of people that are interested in that. However, the integrity that you're talking about, which is to say, let's not speak beyond what we verified, or, we can have an opinion, but that opinion is based on the work that we've done to verify these things and kind of the facts that are behind them,
Yeah, exactly. I can totally tell. I can prove who did the policy changes. I can prove which businesses benefit and which businesses invested money to keep cannabis illegal.
Right.
I can track that. That's one thing. If people really want to understand conspiracy theorists, look into the prohibition of drugs in the United States. Right there, you can see conspiracy happening, documented. It's like, it's not even a theory. It's there since the 1920s, and it's just been, even before that, in the 1900s, they did it with Chinese immigrants, and it's always been based on racism. It's always been based on control, and it's always been based on here's the thing. My part of the reason I believe that they made especially cannabis illegal is because if you commit a crime in the United States, you revoke your freedom and you literally become a property of the state. Mm-hmm. So you go to jail, and then in jail you'll work, but not for free, because that is actual slavery. You'll work for like 67 cents an hour,
right.
$1 an hour.
Right.
And then, some people serve 25 years for, selling a few pounds of weed. What is that but not legalized slavery? Like, what is that but not a mechanism to take the most used illegal substance and convert it into a mechanism to take away people's freedoms, take away people's rights? It's a very Like, for me, prohibition is the antonym of the ethos of the United States.
Right.
Which is, the pursuit of happiness and freedom and all.
Yeah. Go find your new frontier. Go kind of explore that. Figure out what life, what existence makes you happiest or gives you the most satisfaction, whatever that looks like. And I think that is the ethos you're talking about, like of the U.S. It very much speaks to the discovery of this land people didn't even know was there. And then you kind of move, from coast to coast. And, obviously, getting into, the Chiefs just won the Super Bowl yesterday from when we're recording this. The Native American side of that story is very different, but that's a different conversation. Either way, the idea behind the United States was always, you can make your fortune here. This is a place to be free. And, you can kind of have the life that you want if you're willing to work for it and such.
Yes, 100%. And so, this is what these psyops are meant to do. They're meant to keep us confused. They're meant to keep us questioning. My personal feeling on this Bren Specher, I don't know how to pronounce it.
I was hoping that you did, because I also don't. Listener, if you haven't looked, the spelling is Bryn. That's the first name. So I think we can say that's Bryn, most likely. But the last name is Spejcher. So Spejcher, something along those lines. But anyway, now that we have that disclaimer out there,
an anagram for something.
Yeah. Right. It translates to something,
Yeah, I don't know. But the point is, that whole case, for me, the most pressing situation from this is that it establishes legal precedent to use this defense in murder. And what that could do is open the floodgates for people. What about the next school shooter that took a quote unquote hit from a bong?
Right.
Murdered his,
Right.
What about this? And now it's legally a defense.
Yeah.
It's legally, and the bar is so low. She took one hit. Here's the craziest thing about the story. That wasn't the first time she smoked weed.
What? I didn't even know that.
Smoked weed before the time. Oh, yeah. No, I had to dive down to all of the articles about it. But allegedly, that was not the first time she smoked weed.
Huh.
How did she, from having smoked weed in California, I've smoked Cali weed.
Yeah.
Cali weed is potent, sure.
Yeah.
It's been potent for forever, since the 60s. So how can somebody that lives in California that has smoked weed before take a bong hit and suddenly go crazy?
Right. Either there's a body buried out there that people that no one figured out because she smoked weed before, and this is just her reaction to it, or the more likely thing is that she smoked weed, nothing like this happened, she didn't stab anybody 100 times, maybe she was glued to the couch and watched, some Cheech and Chong movie or something and, ordered late pizza, but the point being how absurd it is, and you do a good job of spelling out the specifics here. This one paragraph, you kind of lay out the ridiculousness of this, where her punishment, like we said, she brutally murdered her boyfriend Chad O'Melia after allegedly taking the one hit from a bong, and that the cannabis again allegedly induced a psychotic state. Her punishment, as you lay out here, was a mere 100 hours of community service and 2 years of probation. This after stabbing somebody, her boyfriend apparently, again, as we've said multiple times, she stabbed him over 100 times, went after the dog, and then stabbed herself in the neck. This person was given community service.
Yeah, she's now amongst you. She's going to walk around and she's going to talk to your children. And
yeah. She'll probably be giving a speech at some elementary school, in the next, 6 months.
Yeah, and she'll be crying crocodile tears and saying how bad she feels about this. But I think that if people's gone to jail for 2 decades for a couple of ounces of weed, I think murder, requires, even if it's psychotic, even if she was psychotic, even taking that whole case at face value, that she smoked weed, she lost sense of it. Even if that's true, her first instinct was to kill somebody else to preserve her own life. So, speaking about character, that's not really the type of person that you want in society.
Well, of course. And you pointed out earlier too, just kind of about the the causality where people ever since Anslinger and in the Nixon White House, they have tried to tie these extreme and violent behaviors to cannabis use, and they've tried to tie the drugs to racial communities as well, all in an effort for control here. But like, to paint that picture, for them to put this narrative out in front of us that this woman took a bong hit and then she does this thing, it ignores the millions, hundreds of millions potentially of people around the world who use cannabis every day and don't engage in any violent activity, any extreme activity whatsoever. It's just pointing at this manufactured narrative and saying, hey, look, cannabis did this to this person, and it completely ignores all the people who use cannabis and don't do that stuff.
Yes, 100%, man. Like, I don't know, man. I write on these things and I try to bring it to people's awareness because of the absurdity of prohibition, because of the absurdity of the narratives. You know, alcohol kills people. Like, alcohol can induce psychotic episodes.
Of course.
Alcohol kills some 80,000 plus people and is tied to 40% of all violent crimes, according to the FBI statistics. You know, alcohol by itself is infinitely worse than weed, but how many commercials were at the Super Bowl promoting alcohol?
Dude, you're totally, you're speaking my language. I feel like this is a topic I hit on the show all the time, which is to say how normalized alcohol is. And as you just said, we know how deadly it is. We know so much about it. We have the BAC levels where it's, if your blood has this number in it, we know exactly what it's doing to your brain and how likely you are to either drive off the road or do something violent or whatever it is. We know that alcohol has that effect on your brain. And yet it is so normalized that we do have endless commercials in the Super Bowl and the rest of the times throughout the year. But alcohol is this major part. I mean, I'm sure, listener, when's the last time you went to a social event and you didn't have a drink in your hand? How many questions do you get about it? How many strange looks do you get at that party where people are almost uncomfortable if you don't have a drink in your hand? That's how normalized alcohol is.
Yes, 100%. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't advocate for illegalizing alcohol either. I believe everybody should have the right to consume drugs.
Yeah, and we already tried that, as you said, like the Prohibition. We already tried that, and it obviously didn't work. You know, we just let the door open and let people kind of consume responsibly what they choose.
No, and I believe that there are certain drugs that needs to be more,
policed.
Monitored.
Yes,
yeah, a little bit harder, but I believe personally, if that you are a sentient adult, human, you should have freedom of consciousness. You should have freedom of bodily autonomy. You should be able to say, and in Canada, you can kill yourself, right?
Right.
You can go and be like, yo, kill me. That's great. Okay, cool.
I know some states are considering this in the U.S. as well. The right to die movement is coming here too.
And that's cool. I'm not opposed to that. A lot of people will push back and be like, how can you do that? I was like, if you want to die, you're going to die. You're going to die one way or another.
Yeah.
If you're really committed to killing yourself, there's nobody can stop you doing that.
Right.
So, and ultimately, that is the ultimate freedom, right? The freedom to end your own life. Even though I would tell anybody who comes to me, hey, man, I want to kill myself, I'll tell them a million reasons why I shouldn't.
Yeah,
and I'll
right.
Convince and help them. But at the end of the day, I'll be like, listen, dude, it's your body and it's your choice. Yet in the United States, that exists not as a principle, but only as a thought. It's your body, your choice in certain degrees and certain areas.
Yes.
And not your body, not your choice in others.
Totally. We just talked about the right to die. You can make the abortion argument. You can bring up that same thing, how for a while, that was a federally protected right. Now that's been taken away and the states are doing it, their own different ways. And again, I'm not trying to bring up, all these controversial topics here, but you bring up a great point when you're talking about bodily autonomy. And when you're talking about the ultimate freedom that way, as you said, sentient adults, what they choose is the right thing for them. They're going to find a way to do it one way or the other. There's nothing that any of us can do to control someone else's behavior, whether it's talking about weight loss or holding on to a job or ultimately ending your life,
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, what we can do is create systems to help people that are struggling. We can create systems to help people. If you have a problem with drugs, and like this is something that if people read my articles, I'm not 100%. I don't believe cannabis is for everyone.
Same. I say that on the show all the time, dude. It's for some people. It's for some of us.
Exactly.
I'm not preaching that everybody should be doing this. That's not the message. The message is for those of us who like it, maybe better than alcohol or cigarettes or the normalized stuff. Why don't we have the same freedoms that everyone else gets to enjoy?
Precisely. And that's the thing. So it's like, some people, maybe Bryn, is a person who shouldn't smoke weed because she becomes violent, and kills people.
Right.
Maybe she should also be monitored for the rest of her life. I think.
I think that's reasonable. I mean, if you kill somebody that violently, I can't think of any rational person who would hear the details of this case and be comfortable with this person only serving community service and she's on 2 years of probation. It's like that. I don't think anybody would think that's rational.
And to just, throw one other, topic into the fire. What if the genders were reversed? Would the same sentence have been given? What if
man.
It was Chad that killed Bryn.
Right.
Same thing.
It's a great question. And I think, I think anybody who you pose that question to, it's like, we know the answer. The answer is no, it would not be equal,
And this is where it comes to. So maybe, there's theories that, Charles Manson was PSYOP, was CIA, and there's an argument to be made there as well. I'm not going to open up this. This I do believe, though. I'm not going to go into it because that once again is more fringes of conspiratorial, so I won't open
Sure, I appreciate you walking the line, because you're right. You open some cans of worms and all of a sudden it just never stops. We can walk the line, at least on this episode, yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's fun to talk about them, and this is something that I think people need to start understanding. Like, it's okay to explore dumb ideas. It's okay to explore complex ideas,
Right.
For example, flat Earth. Some people will hear that and say, "Oh my God!" and don't believe it. I'm not a flat earther. Don't worry about it.
Okay, great. Me neither.
But for example, let's say somebody shows up and says, "Here's my flat Earth," and blah blah blah, and it's the first time they hear it. We should learn to have the ability to study something as if you're a believer, and then study something as if you're its hardest critic. And then in between those two poles, you'll learn stuff. You'll learn stuff about, how the earth moves and how light reflects from the atmosphere and all these different crazy stuff.
Yeah.
The trick is to not drink the Kool-Aid, right? Swirl the Kool-Aid in your mouth, taste it, smell it, get familiar with it, understand what it is, but don't drink it. Don't consume it. Don't say, "Oh yeah, this is it." Because the moment that you say this is it, this is what that idea is the moment that you stop questioning, and it's the moment that you start looking for supporting answers. You change your approach to information entirely the moment that you believe something to be true. Because then your idea and your ego will defend that truth because it's now a part of you.
Absolutely. I think that's really well said. I love the Kool-Aid analogy, especially, given the Charles Manson topic that you just brought up too. But seriously, that's such a great and important point, because I think that confirmation bias is a real thing. When you do buy into something, when you decide that a conclusion that's it, any research that you're doing or any conversations you have, that's just the way the human mind works. Your brain works to find supporting evidence for your theory and ignore conflicting evidence with your theory. And so the way that you just kind of spelled that out, Jandre, is that it's like, to be able to maintain that sort of distance in your own head and not be afraid of asking questions. No questions, as far as I'm concerned, are evil inherently. If, you use the flat earth example, if somebody comes to your party and starts kind of, asking questions about, is the earth flat kind of a thing, there's nothing evil or wrong about having that conversation. Now, you have we all have our reasons of not buying into that that theory. But letting someone else explain their reasonings for buying into it and then getting into arguments on those specifics, that's how you can come to more firmly hold your beliefs. Socrates said the unexamined life was not worth living. When someone comes to your party and asks a question about a flat earth, that's examining your belief about whether or not it is flat. And if you allow yourself to have those thoughts, to do research as if you don't believe one way or the other, any beliefs that you come to hold will stand up to scrutiny. You know, I think anybody who it just gets dogmatically brought into a religion and never questions why they believe what they believe or whatever. You know, you go to some event later on in your life and somebody asks an innocent question, and now all of a sudden your whole foundation is crumbling because you never asked any such question. That's the stuff that we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, just be okay with asking one way or the other why you feel this way or why somebody else believes what they do.
Yeah, 100%. And like, challenge your own, views on the world. Like, the first time I was proposed that question was maybe like 10 years ago, before it became even what it is today. Somebody's like, we're living on a flat earth. I personally believe we float on the back of a giant space turtle. But
yes.
That's my belief,
It's turtles all the way down. That's what they say. I got you, man.
It is, so, but, at the beginning I said, okay, let me consider this absurd idea. Is the earth flat, right? It's absurd. Then you look at maps and you look at all these historical things and you see, okay, some people are looking at the information this way, other people are looking at the information this way, and they create polar opposite opinions. And then you realize I'm too stupid to understand any of these things, right? I don't understand, advanced physics, and I don't understand these things. And so these people are explaining all these crazy, complicated information, and I don't really get it. And then at the end, you're like, I asked this one guy who was asking me about it. He's like, what do you think about flat earth? And I was like, what does it do for you? Right? What does the belief of a flat earth do for you? And he said, well, it shows me that they, quote, like air quotes, are lying to us.
Sure.
And I'm like, cool, that's a great thing. You could also research drug prohibition and get that same conclusion. You don't need to believe in something like the flat earth to realize that there are people that's got vested interest in keeping a certain narrative afloat in society.
Totally.
Okay, and now that you've understand that, okay, what else does this idea of flat earth give you? What does it give you? Well, nothing really beyond that they're lying to us. I was like, okay, cool. And will it change the way you behave? Will it change what you eat? Will it change how you travel? Will it change any of those things? No. All right, cool. You can believe it or you don't have to believe it. That's your choice. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't have any real significant impact, there's no need to spend any energy in defending something that really has such a little amount of impact in your life.
Totally.
And at the end of the day, the contents that you keep in your mind are the things that's going to influence your behavior most. This is why psyops are crazy. This is why these things. What I do apart from writing, I do user experience design. So I'm into behavioral economics. I'm into click psychology, color psychology, all of these things. And I've been writing for over 15 years now. I know that the words that I put out somehow shape people's minds. My whole purpose, though, is let's question everything. Let's question our authorities. Let's question this, even if it's crazy. I have a section called Ganja Theories where I just talk bullshit. And it's like, all right, let's smoke a joint and let me think about some, like, for example, some Ganja theory I'm going to be working on soon, probably this week, is about alcohol prohibition and how that wasn't really about the temperance movement. It was actually about ethanol and how the early cars ran on ethanol and people made their own alcohol at home that they poured into their cars, and then, they were basically self-sustainable.
Interesting. It's an interesting angle of the prohibition. By the way, where can if people want to, read more about this, where can they find it?
That's on cannabis.net. All my cannabis related stuff. I write every week I submit 3 articles to cannabis.net.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Nice and simple. So yeah, listener, you can find this stuff there at cannabis.net.
Yeah, any title that's weird and crazy is probably me.
That's right. Reginald Reefer. There you go. Yeah. The dude, I love it. And you touched on a lot of great stuff there, but one thing that kind of ultimately stuck out in my mind as you were, making that point was really that I think all of us, every single one of us has a conspiracy theory du jour, meaning we have a conspiracy theory that we vibe with. Whether you're somebody that looks into the JFK assassination, whether you're a flat earther, whether, you're looking into, Atlantis and whatever happened there, or the Egyptian pyramids. I mean, there is a long, long list of potential conspiracy theories that you can do a deep dive into. And the one thing they all have in common is, as you said to the person that you were talking with Flat Earths about, really what it makes us all feel is that they're lying to us, is that there is a shadowy group somehow pulling the strings. Recently, the Jeffrey Epstein stuff that's been going around a lot too, it kind of swims in those same waters, you know what I mean? Where it just gives people this sense that there are heroes and villains in the world, and that there's a big group of those villains pulling the strings behind the scenes. And whatever conspiracy theory that you vibe with, that's ultimately, I think, what it's kind of getting at. And just realizing that we all have that propensity within us, that we all have the potential to have some conspiracy theory appeal to us, I think that's important in understanding how and why people believe what they believe.
Yeah, I mean, we are driven by narrative. That is what we do. Everything that you do in your life is because of a story that you tell yourself, right? You wake up in the mornings and you're like, I'm doing this because of X, Y, or Z. So you've got your whole purpose, you've got your formula. We're a conglomerate of internal automated processes. Like 95% of you is happening unconsciously. Only 5% is a conscious little window that you have to your consciousness is sort of like a little rudder on the back of a boat, and the boat is moving forward in the ocean of time. But with consciousness, you can shape that rudder to change your direction and float.
Right.
And so these things that we invite into our minds and into our hearts dictate the position of that rudder. So you need to understand, where do you want to get to? And what are the ideas or concepts that will help you get there? And that is the fundamental equation of life. Especially in modern times. Like back in the day, there was a cookie cutter ways of living, right? You go to high school, go to college, get a job, get married, have kids, die.
Right.
And that was the productivity cookie cutter pipeline that they made for us. And now with AI, with podcasting, with the internet and so forth, we have this ability to choose anything we want. And if you want to go into astrology and stuff like that, within the Hindu philosophy, we're entering into the age of Kali, and within the astrological chart, we're entering into the age of Aquarius. And so, what that means, at least from a philosophical perspective, the age of Aquarius, the previous age was the age of Pisces, which was the age of duality. So there was good and evil. There was two choices. Everything was binary. And the age of Aquarius. And in the age of Kali, these are sort of more fluid things. That's why even with this whole transgender stuff, like these core concepts are sort of falling apart and becoming more fluid. And with AI, that's even more possible. Like, I think it was Sam, I don't know, is it Altman?
Altman of OpenAI, ChatGPT, that guy.
Yeah, he said that due to AI, we're going to get the first one-person billion-dollar company.
I read that as well. I read that last week.
That's totally possible, man.
Yeah, and I love, what you just said there too. I do think that I love it if we are moving into an age with more options than just one or two, or binary, good, evil, and that's that. I do think that so much of life falls on a spectrum where it's not just one thing or the other. We often, to simplify choices, I think that we often reduce it to two options because it's easier to deal with two things than, an infinite number of possibilities.
Yeah.
But Yeah, chaos. Exactly. But I think that the truth is, if we allow ourselves to expand, we realize that in so many cases, maybe in all cases, there are more than just two options. And I love it if we're moving into an age where that's more common and more thought of, you know?
I think we're currently in a state of sort of transition between that. My own personal theories is that this sort of age kickstarted roughly in 2012, 2013. That's when it like started. And if you track back into how things have developed, it's about from 2015, 2016 where like shit gets weird. Right? Like stuff's been going like in a certain trajectory, and then right before Trump made his first appearance in the government, you know, and he did his whole thing. Right then, stuff just flipped on itself and became infinitely crazy. And so I think right now we're at this transitionary period, sort of the time between when it's midnight and becomes morning. You know, that it's like it was 11:59 p.m. evening. Now it's 12:01. It's in the morning,
right,
the next day. But it still kind of looks the same. It all still pitch black. It's still like that. But really, the changes happened. And right now, maybe we're like 3 a.m. into the new day.
Still waking up. Still kind of waking up to it, for sure.
And I think the AI and all of these things are going to play a significant role. I also personally believe that we will have a new psychedelic revolution coming. This currently is going to be used in the realm of personal development, in the realm of self-exploration, potentially even a neo-spiritual revolution with the psychedelics. And I think the system is piss scared of that.
I think you're right about that, Jandre. I really do. I think I can feel that same thing myself. You can see different states and countries legalizing psychedelics because the medical benefits are being acknowledged. And, you know, as to your point about us just kind of waking up, we're just scratching the surface of how not just personal life altering, like for all of us, but paradigm shifting, like the entirety of our existence and the way that we go about things. I do think that we are on the cusp of some kind of change in that, and psychedelics are just a huge part. It goes back to the mind expansion that we were talking about. If everybody was comfortable with that and you could tap into your own potential by using some of these things, again, nobody's talking about every day, but the way that they used to be portrayed in terms of partying, we all know that psychedelics are about a whole hell of a lot more than that now.
Yes. And I actually think that in order for humanity to fully integrate with the new AI ecosystem, it's going to be an absolute need for us to do that. Because one of the things that, for example, psilocybin does to the brain is it connects all regions of the brain simultaneously. And then it also induces a heightened state of neuroplasticity, which means like you're able to take a paradigm and shift it. You're able to actually play with the paradigm. It doesn't become a structure in your mind. And now you can sort of say, oh, this is a new configuration that it can work in.
Yeah.
So what I think what's going to happen, or at least what needs to happen, let's hope that the powers that be comply. But I think that really, every individual will begin looking for these type of things. But in order to enter into this new age, some people are going to need to do that mind expansion journeys with plant medicines to be able to understand, okay, this isn't the same world it was 20 years ago, and it's not going to be the same world in 10 years. The acceleration processes are much quicker. We need to become more fluid and more readily available to adapt to new situations. And alcohol and these things, they create very structured people, and those are the people that's going to struggle the most in this new world. The people that are incapable of destroying their own paradigms in order to embrace new ones, and are able to say, what I have believed in all of my life might not be the thing that is most beneficial for me.
Right.
And that's where I think we're at currently in society. And I believe these psyops are sort of, ways to keep us in check, but it's come to a point of no return. Like we're about to cross into the snowball effect. And there's not much that they're going to be able to do.
Yeah, and man, I feel like I could talk to you about this all day, Jandre. I mean, I'm right there with you on so much of this stuff, and I just touching one final thing about, like, we were talking about psychedelics and the part of the reason these things expand the minds, and why, for instance, with psilocybin, why it's so beneficial for people with trauma or to change your behavior when you have bad habits or anything you're looking to change. Our neurons, when you learn a new skill or you have some experience, you're carving a neural pathway into your gray matter. It's like a little canal, a wrinkle in your brain is cut into it. And so that neuron, the more you do something, that's why when you work at a job for 40 years, you can do it with your eyes closed or when you're half asleep, or when you've driven the same path, 100 times, you can do it without thinking about it at all because it's sort of just going on autopilot. And psilocybin and these other psychedelics, what we're understanding now is they can basically, as Jandre said, they can improve your neuroplasticity. The visual that I like to look at is they kind of smooth out that gray matter. So basically, those wrinkles and those neural pathways that were carved, those get reset. And it's much easier then to learn new information or to learn to do things a new way and to reject the old way that, even if you've been doing it for 40 years, to understand that there is a different, potentially better way. That is a part of what psychedelics can bring to you if you're using them in the right settings, and why that potential mind expansion, again, as we've been talking about this whole time, may be so threatening to those people who are looking to preserve the status quo as it is.
Yeah, 100%. And there's not much they're going to do about this. I really think that this is just part of the natural evolution of society. They might try to clamp down. And, you've got this whole Biden, will they, won't they legalize narrative that they do. But, it's all bread and circus. It's not actually what they're doing. It's not the people doing it. Let's rather put it that way. It's the government's playing, trying to set themselves up, getting this on.
It's political.
Ignore the noise.
Yeah.
Ignore that noise. Everybody, if you want to go, and I'll direct this to your listeners, I'm not saying do psychedelics. I'm actually, be very careful when you do. It's not something it's not like weed, for example. Cannabis is much more benign and has a much lesser degree of impact, but it also does that neuroplasticity. It also does make the wrinkle less wrinkly.
Yeah.
But just at a very much smaller, less intense degree. But let's say there's some people that's listening to this and saying, I want to do psychedelics. Number one, do your due diligence, the research, understand what could potentially happen. Two, do it in a certain setting is important. If you don't know what that is, then you're not ready to do psychedelics.
Totally. I've brought up set and setting on the show before. It's something that I preach as often as I can. You're totally right on with that.
And then finally, get yourself if it's your first time, don't just jump into the deep end. Go with somebody experienced. Go with somebody that you trust. And then just experience it without expectation. Don't try to change yourself. That's one of the biggest, misconcepts. And don't try to party with it. Like, yes, it's fun to party on psychedelics. Don't get me wrong. You can go to a rave and you can have the best time of your life.
Right.
But if we're looking at the ocean of what the potential of psychedelics is, that's playing in the most shallowest of the shore possibly. Is having fun, is doing what the hippies did, and dancing and going crazy and stuff. That's fine. Okay, go for it. Do it once, twice, maybe 10 times. It's fine. I don't mind. But if you really, really want to take that next step, you're going to start taking these things in a pseudo-spiritual capacity, sort of like they did it back in the day, where you would go with a shaman and undergo a journey of spiritual exploration. And when you do it with this type of reverence and the right settings, it can accelerate growth, tenfold. Something that would take you 10 years to do, you can do it in 6 months. And this is what you're going to need in a world that is constantly adapting around you. Because AI is not going to slow stuff down. It's only going to accelerate everything.
Oh, yeah. We already see it happening for sure.
Yeah. And so and this is right now we're seeing this, but what's happening next, the next major issue is the revolution in material sciences due to AI. So AI is going to help us take, for example, 100 years worth of research and bring that down to like a year. And then we're going to start developing new materials. And that new materials is what's needed for us to do space exploration and all these, like, autonomous robots and all of these things. So,
yeah. It's exciting, but also freaky. It's why I think that's why people are feeling it, is that you can kind of smell the impending change on the wind. I think that anybody paying attention at all, even a little bit, I think we can feel this major paradigm shift coming, and it's better to get ready for it now than pretend it's not happening. Certainly.
Yeah. So just, if you're going to explore these things, do it in a very responsible manner. If you're under the age of 25, I'm not going to say no, because I did it myself.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say, be careful.
Yeah.
Really sit down and do your due diligence. Have the guides, have these things, and really don't do it for the sake of doing drugs. That's the biggest mistake of drugs, is that people do it for that feeling of, ooh, I felt so good. Dopamine rushes are amazing. But at the end of the day, we are on a journey of self-discovery, and we're in a journey of self-exploration. And so you got to use that with a little bit more reverence than drinking a beer.
Yeah, I think you've spelled that out very well. I think you have to respect these things as they are. And again, there's a part of why younger people do them. I think it's because they don't have so much fear about new experiences, is that they're willing to take risks in a way that, a lot of older people are not. But psychedelics are something that I think can kind of help you with that, as well as so many other things. Just as we were talking about, I think one of the analogies that I like is, the shamans that Jandre was just bringing up, you wouldn't go for a long swim in the ocean without a lifeguard. You know what I mean? You wouldn't go for a long trek through a forest you're not familiar with without a guide, maybe.
Yes.
And that's the way that you should be looking at psychedelics. It's not something, it's not a pool to jump in on your own, no matter how good of a swimmer you may think you are. It's definitely, you want set and setting, you want somebody who can be a guide for you that way. But, this stuff that we're talking about, it's really important. And again, as Jandre said earlier in the interview, what you hold in your mind, the thoughts you have, they're going to impact the words that you say and the actions that you take. And your life is ultimately a collection of those kinds of choices, those actions, those personal connections. And if you find psychedelics are worth trying for you, by all means do it. And if they're not your thing, that's totally fine too. Again, we're not trying to force anybody to change behavior here, but maybe just be a little open-minded in terms of what the possibilities are. And the media that you consume, if you're on social media all the time, depending on what news platforms you get your info from, that can shape your own narratives, your thought processes, your words, and your actions as well. And if you're interested in the conversations that the one that we just had, as well as, many more of these kinds of topics and whatnot, one of the publications you can check out is cannabis.net. And definitely look out for Reginald Reefer and any blog posts or any articles that he's posting. And that is Jandre Gerber's pen name. And he's going to be bringing stuff like this to you well into the future, I hope. Thanks a lot for stopping by, Jandre.
Yeah, no, thank you, Don. I had a great time talking about all of these crazy things. Always, anybody tells me that you want to sit down and talk about this, I'm always game. So, if in any time in the future you'd like me to sit down and talk about specific aspects, I'm totally down for it, man.
I certainly will. I will definitely be reaching out to you in the future. Like I said, I could talk with you about these kinds of things all day, and I look forward to some of those more conversations in the future. Listener, I apologize because I wanted to kind of get more to the psyops piece that Jandre wrote here. It is a great piece, and I'm sharing it in the description notes. So if you want to read it, which I encourage, scroll down and just click on it in the description notes. But you did great work, and keep it up, Jandre, and we'll talk again in the future.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate it, man.
And there you have it, listener. I want to thank my guest one more time, Jandre Gerber, a.k.a. Reginald Reefer, and you can read that piece we were just talking about at cannabis.net, along with all of Jandre's other writings. He puts out some great blog posts and articles relating to cannabis, and there's a lot of great stuff here on this website that you can find whenever you're looking to read about different topics. I have definitely talked about some of the themes they've covered before, and there's some good information on here. So it's a source that's worth kind of keeping in your repertoire if you like to stay up to date about cannabis, along with listening to the Cannabis Man podcast. But if you're interested in more of what Reginald is up to, he shared with me a link to his YouTube channel. He kind of mentioned about how he's going through some breathing exercises and kind of playing with altered states of consciousness through breath work, aside from just kind of substances to reach altered states. And I'm going to go ahead and give one of his videos a try, but I'm linking his YouTube channel in the description notes. If you want to try these out for yourself, go for it in the meantime. But I'll let you know how that goes for me once I have a chance to try out the video that he sent me. Got a couple of topics that I thought you would find interesting this week, listener. One of them from our friends at Marijuana Moment. This article was published by Kyle Yeager. It came out February 27th, so a little over a week ago. The headline reads, THCV increases energy and motivation without marijuana's munchies effect. Double-blind study finds. This article from Kyle says a lesser-known cannabinoid, THCV, appears to have more energizing effects without the fatigue and munchies associated with cannabis's more prominent delta-9 THC compound. That's according to a new double-blind clinical study. The cannabis genetics company Phylos and marijuana research firm People Science announced the results of the study they conducted, which demonstrated that a THCV product, quote, significantly increased energy, activity, motivation, and well-being compared to placebo. The cannabinoid, which was previously coined diet weed due to its apparent lack of appetite-inducing effects, is one of numerous cannabis constituents that have emerged on the market. In this latest institutional review board-approved study, researchers gave 78 participants either unmedicated placebo gummies, delta-9 THC-only gummies, or gummies infused with Phylos's Get Shit Done THCV dominant plant. They found that 20% of participants who received the THCV gummies reported feeling more energized compared to the placebo. 40% more said they enjoy daily activities after taking the novel cannabinoid, while 50% of those who took the standard THC-only gummy reported increased hunger. That effect was not statistically significant in the THCV group. Also, the THC-only cohort was 3 times as likely to report fatigue compared to those who received THCV. Interestingly here, both the THC-only and THCV gummies, quote, increased activity, exercise, performance, motivation, and well-being compared to placebo. Worth noting, the study was double-blind, but it has not been published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. So I will be waiting on those peer reviews. I always like to see corroboration in scientific studies, but I am really, really interested, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm interested in this THCV cannabinoid here. We've talked on the show before, I've talked with guests about it, and I've brought to you the potential, the exciting potential of a lot of these cannabinoids that are found among cannabis plants. I've talked many times about how overly simplistic categorizing cannabis plants into either indica or sativas has been, and even though it makes sense as to why people focused on THC and CBD only, we know now that there are hundreds of compounds that exist in cannabis plants that are far beyond the only ones that got popular, THC and CBD. The more studies and research that are done on cannabis plants, we're finding out more about these cannabinoids, like THCV. And I think anybody, who's living in today's world would be interested in increased energy and motivation, leaving behind the lethargy and maybe the munchies effects of a total entourage cannabis effect. Instead of smoking straight THC, like me, myself, As I've talked about just today even, combining cannabis and coffee is a nice, fun way that I like to start my day. I am somebody with enough of a tolerance, and I lean towards sativas, that when you combine coffee or caffeine with cannabis, it does this wonderful dance in the system. And I do feel increased energy and motivation and sort of this creative euphoria. If I could get that reliably without having to deal with kind of the come down that comes inevitably from smoking cannabis, if I could get this increased energy and not have to deal with any munchies, this is the stuff that's really exciting about today's legal cannabis market. We are all living in a world where we're going to get to enjoy products that are offering us the exact cannabinoids that we are seeking. If you wake up in the morning and you want some boost of energy, but maybe you have found that caffeine is just a little bit too addictive for you. You don't want to get hooked back on it again. Or maybe you have found caffeine is good, but there's a little too much of it in coffee. Or even you find that you're getting sensitive to it as you're older, so you've turned to tea. But maybe now green tea is getting you a little more jittery than you'd like. What if THCV is the answer that you've been looking for? You get that increased energy and motivation in the morning, but you don't have to deal with the come down of smoking just base cannabis. You don't have to deal with the lack of focus. You don't have to deal with the decreased motivation of some other strains of cannabis. You see, if cannabis does have hundreds of compounds in each plant, we're all of us basically playing Russian roulette every time we smoke cannabis as to what we're going to get. We certainly used to be doing that when we would just get it from the dealers. Now, we live in this world where it's becoming legal, and as the research is done and these companies are dialing in on these specific cannabinoids, we are getting products that are on dispensary shelves and they're out in the marketplaces that are going to speak to these exact and specific needs. This is very exciting. So anyway, I'll be talking more about THCV on upcoming episodes as different companies are looking into trying to utilize this down the road. Now turning to a different topic that I thought was worth your attention, listener. Florida has done something today that I think we should all be making note of. This is from today, March 7th. This news just hit this morning. Florida bill that bans Delta 8 and other compounds has been sent to the governor. The state House passed this bill, and now the Senate passed this bill. That is the news from today. So now the bill is on Governor Ron DeSantis' desk. And it's a wide-ranging bill that critics say could destroy the state's hemp market. This is Senate Bill 1698 in the state. It was approved in the House by a 64-48 vote, according to the Tampa Bay Times. And now it's heading to Governor Ron DeSantis' desk to be signed into law. The measure to ban hemp-derived products containing Delta 8 and Delta 10 THC was unanimously approved by the Senate in February. It would ban a variety of Delta 8 and Delta 10 products, including gummies, tinctures, and vapes. It would also prohibit other cannabinoids like THCV and THCP from being infused into hemp extracts, and would cap intoxicating Delta 9 THC products to 5 milligrams per serving or 50 milligrams per package, according to the Tampa Bay Times. Hemp-derived low-dose THC advocates and business operators have criticized the legislation for potentially dismantling the industry while propping up the medical marijuana sector. Florida voters could decide on adult use legalization in November, but that potential vote is awaiting a state Supreme Court ruling on a challenge to the ballot initiative. At least 18 states prohibit Delta 8 under certain circumstances, according to MJ Biz Daily research. MJ Biz Daily is the publication from which I am reading this article. I will share the article in the show description notes, as I always do, and I encourage you to read this yourself. The author here is just listed as MJ Biz Daily staff. But anyway, I wanted to bring that up because A was just talking about THCV and how exciting it is to have products that speak to specific cannabinoids, but I have spoken to guests in the past on this show. I've spoken with people who, interestingly enough, have said that basically cannabis cannabis is legal in the U.S. up to a certain threshold, that threshold being 0.03% THC, which is what that 2018 Farm Bill legalizes. And a lot of hemp-derived products, that is the threshold that they keep their products underneath, thereby allowing them to sell them pretty much all across the country. Now, Florida is making a move that would potentially ban these stand-in products. Depending on where you live, listener, you may have experienced some of these hemp-based products, these Delta 8 or Delta 10 products here. I live in Chicago. I'm here in Illinois. And for years now, there have been businesses popping up. I spoke with people about this recently, the S3 Collective episode that came out in January. If you didn't listen to that, I recommend you go back and check it out. But there is a group, S3 Collective, that is looking to regulate the additives market, the stand-in market here. What they really want is unification of standards, because right now, and this is what we talked about, any of these Delta 8, Delta 10, any of these substitutes that are not Delta 9 THC, there is no regulation of these in this country. The FDA that looks at substances and foods and drugs that we all consume, they are not touching Delta 8 and Delta 10 stuff. And as we wait for the DEA and FDA to possibly reschedule Delta 9 THC and reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, many people and many businesses have turned to these substitute products, the Delta 8s and the Delta 10s. Maybe you've walked down the street in some city and you've seen a head shop with a neon sign in the window advertising CBD or hemp or kratom, that KRATOM product. That's what these are, Delta 8 and Delta 10 substitutes for the Delta 9 baseline THC that we all know from basic cannabis. The reason I thought this was worth bringing up is because A, the 2018 Farm Bill that legalized hemp products to be sold across the country, that was only extended for 1 year to cover 2024. So we don't even know if it'll get another year in existence, or maybe they'll come up with a different farm bill. But Florida is not waiting for that hemp bill federally to kind of dictate which substitutes are legal to be sold here. And I'm wondering if other states may be considering bans similar to this Florida bill. Now, if you live in a state where cannabis is not legal, maybe you've been relying on some of these substitutes to kind of get by. You are certainly going to want to pay attention to what happens with this Florida bill and pay attention to what other states do regarding these Delta 8, Delta 10 substitutes as we move forward here. Now, if the FDA, DEA, if they do reschedule cannabis and they make it Schedule 3, or, hey, decriminalize it altogether, then this becomes kind of a moot point, because it's like, why would you bother selling a substitute if everybody's okay to just sell the actual thing that people want? You know, if everyone can sell Coca-Cola, you know, if Coca-Cola is all of a sudden legal for everybody to sell with that specific original formula, people aren't going to be selling the Coke Zero, the Diet Cokes, the Pepsi Clears. They're not going to bother with it. Everybody will just, set up a Coke machine, and they'll just, because they know that's what you want. That's what I expect to happen if we do get a rescheduled Delta 9 baseline cannabis here. I expect that these sort of substitutes and the vast marketplace that has popped up over the last few years, I expect that to kind of fall by the wayside. But it is important, and this is kind of what I was speaking with S3 Collective about, David Valencourt and Alina Rodriguez. Again, listen to that episode that came out in January if you haven't. But this is what we were talking about. Because there is no uniform regulation of these substitute products, some bad things can happen to people who consume them. Because there's no nutrition labels that have to be accurate that are being approved by a government body on these products. It can literally be something that somebody grew and then they draw a label with a crayon on the packaging that you would buy from one of these stores. That's literally what they can sell you. And so I do think that uniform, standardized regulations is good for everybody. We do want that. But on the other hand, I also get why people are leaning on these substitutes if you don't live in a legal cannabis state, medically or recreationally. But either way, that was something I thought was worth bringing to your attention. And one more thing that I want to bring to your attention before letting you go this week, listener. There was another article I found here with a topic that I think all of us who consume cannabis will take some positivity from. A study found that cannabis consumers have, quote, significantly decreased odds of cognitive decline. Marijuana use is associated with lower odds of subjective cognitive decline, according to a new study, with people who consume cannabis for recreational or medical purposes reporting less confusion and memory loss compared to non-users. The study, which showed that recreational cannabis use is, quote, significantly linked to lower SCD, which is that subjective cognitive decline, is especially notable given that past research has connected subjective decline to the development of dementia later in life. The results, which were published in the journal Current Alzheimer Research this month, indicate that THC's impacts on cognitive function may be more complicated than popularly assumed. The study says, quote, compared to non-users, non-medical cannabis use was significantly associated with 96% decreased odds of SCD. 96%. People who reported using marijuana for medical purposes or for both medical and recreational purposes also showed decreased odds of SCD, although not significant, the study found. The article goes on to be sure a number of earlier studies have indicated negative associations between heavy cannabis use and mental performance. Authors of the new study out of the SUNY Upstart Medical University in Syracuse pointed to past results linking long-term or frequent cannabis use to compromised verbal recall performance, worsened cognitive function, and subjective memory complaints, for example. Another quote here, however, the cognitive implications of cannabis are not only determined by the frequency of cannabis consumption, they wrote, noting that other factors, including product formulation, method of administration, and reason for use, may also, quote, impact the cognitive effects associated with cannabis use. The report says, quote, our study addresses these knowledge gaps by comprehensively examining how reason, frequency, and method of cannabis use are associated with SCD among U.S. middle-aged and older adults. I'll leave it there. The article goes on for quite a bit and gives a lot more detail about the studies, the specifics, and the positives and negative takeaways. I definitely encourage you to read this one as well. You can find it linked below in the description notes along with the other articles. But I thought this was really fascinating. I mean, I think most of us, anyone who's been in this space for any significant amount of time, we have all heard the stereotypes linking cannabis use and poor memory performance, or maybe some poor recall, especially as people get older. But just in general, if you're a heavy user, I think people in general expect your cognition to be, lower performance, let's say. And this new study, which looked at, over 4,000 users, finds the opposite, finds that cannabis use significantly reduces odds of cognitive decline. And it's not just some slight decrease. Again, significantly, we're talking 96%. That's crazy. That is a crazy amount to reduce your subjective cognitive decline. I mean, if somebody told you that you could be 100% more mobile by consuming, chewing gum every day, wouldn't you then make the move to chew gum as much as you could as you aged? I mean, this is crazy. Again, I like to wait until peers can review this study and try and recreate it, see what other people find, but this is fantastic stuff. So a few positive notes to tell you about and end this week on relating to studies, checking in on cannabis, and then a little bit of kind of a mixed bag there with the Florida bill potentially banning some cannabis substitutes. But as I said, that's not really all positive or negative either. There's some good and bad. in that development as well. So that is where I will leave it this week. I really appreciate you listening. I hope you took some knowledge and perspective away from this episode. If you have any questions or want more information about what I spoke on, reach out at C-Man Podcast on Twitter or Instagram. It's the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can also always email host@cannabismanpodcast.com. Plenty of people have already. I really love it when you do. Feel free to reach out and give some feedback. As I said at the top, please, if you haven't already, leave a rating or a review for the show on whichever platform you're listening. If it's YouTube, hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, leave that rating or a review for the show. It really means a lot to me, and it helps what I'm doing here stand out from other podcasts. And of course, if you really love it, become a subscriber. Scroll down to the description notes and hit that support the show link. It'll take you to the Buzzsprout page. You can become a subscriber, and you'll get a thank you email from me, and you'll get your name shouted out in the credits of the next episode. And have yourself a wonderful weekend. Spend some time outside, even if you're around Chicago and it's not the warmest yet, not as warm as we might like. It is getting there. The days are getting longer. Plants, flowers are starting to bloom, and I feel like I can almost taste those summer barbecues and, feel the warm air and hear the sounds of the cicadas as the days stretch long into the evenings of summer. And I'm really looking forward to having some good times with good people, and I hope you get to do that too. Enjoy the weekend, spend time with your loved ones, and be kind to others. We're all just doing our best to get by in this crazy world. And I'll talk to you next week with more news, events, and perspective relating to the journey of legal cannabis, all here on the Cannabis Man Podcast. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Goodson.